The modern mind does not collapse all at once. Listen to me. It erodes quietly. In the dead of night, you are bartering your cognitive sovereignty for a cheap hit of dopamine while the world sleeps. Not through some grand, dramatic failure, but through thousands of small, pathetic negotiations. We have romanticized the no worries facade in this country, while our internal standards are liquefying into mediocrity. 5 more minutes. One more scroll. I will start Monday. This is not rest. This is a systematic cognitive surrender of your executive function to the path of least resistance. You commute through the CBD, a ghost in a tailored suit, feeling a hollow ache you cannot quite name. You have outsourced your agency to the white noise of the digital hive mind. Now you realize the terrifying truth. You are no longer the pilot. You are watching your own life from the passenger seat, a spectator to your own biological and spiritual decline. This is executive atrophy. You issue a high-level command, lace up, move, evolve, but your biological hardware defaults to the path of least resistance. You are no longer the commander-in-chief of your own physiology. You are a spectator to your own stagnation. You draft these grand architectures of productivity, but by the time the morning sun hits the glass towers of the CBD, your lizard brain has already filed for bankruptcy. You have become a serial betrayer of your own intent, romanticizing potential while ignoring the decay of your discipline. In the sterile silence of a Melbourne midnight, the reality crystallizes. You have lost the most critical asset in your portfolio, self-congruence. You no longer believe the promises you make to yourself, and that is the ultimate cognitive surrender. Listen closely. The most dangerous form of erosion isn't your bank balance or your social standing. It is the abdication of neurological sovereignty. Your nervous system has been outsourced to external stimuli, leaving you a passenger in a vehicle you are supposed to be piloting. This is not merely the no-worries burnout of the corporate grind. It is psychological necrosis. You are witnessing the slow death of your agency, one ignored alarm, and one digital distraction at a time. It is time to seize the controls back from the void. This cognitive leaking is the persistent, gray drizzle of a Sydney winter. It follows you onto the 6:15 out of the CBD, clinging to your coat like the smell of damp wool and discarded ambitions as you head for the suburbs. It manifests in the executive paralysis of your evenings. Dim apartments in Richmond or Surrey Hills, lit by the cold blue glow of a laptop that consumes your remaining mental capital while your actual life sits untouched. This is the terminal stage of psychological necrosis. You can sleep 8 hours under a tin roof during a Melbourne storm and wake up empty, because your subconscious knows you've defaulted on your internal debt. The truth is a jagged pill. You have surrendered your neurological sovereignty. You aren't navigating your life anymore. You have allowed the no-worries mask to hide the fact that you are merely reacting to the friction of existence. Your agency has been outsourced to dopamine-driven impulses and algorithmic pings. You've traded your cognitive legacy for a sequence of hollow digital microhits that leave you colonized by someone else's code. Meet David, 35, a senior software architect. He didn't just experience limbic friction, he existed within its corrosive atmosphere. He projected the curated Australian ideal, a stable career, a steady pulse, and that thick no-worries armor that masks a deeper psychological necrosis. Top-tier tax bracket, sharp cognitive baseline, a model participant in the socio-economic machine of the modern Commonwealth. But in the sterile silence of a CBD bathroom stall, the facade liquidates. His internal sovereignty was a bankrupt state. His own mind had staged a silent coup. Every sunset brought a performance of intent, a 5 a.m. alarm, a vow to reclaim his biological hardware, and finally honor his internal debt. Every sunrise, David surrendered his neurological sovereignty to the seductive lie of the snooze button, a micro-betrayal that encoded failure into his prefrontal cortex before he even touched the floor. In the glass towers of the Sydney CBD, he'd attempt a high-state cognitive sprint, but the moment his phone vibrated, his focus shattered, a casualty of the dopamine-driven reflex. 40 minutes evaporated in a trance of algorithmic servitude. He wasn't browsing. He was being harvested, his cognitive reserves drained by notifications he never consented to process. By sunset, the intention was clear: intellectual elevation. He wanted to sharpen his edge, to deconstruct the systems of his own stagnation through the heavyweight texts on his bedside. Yet, under the rhythmic thrum of rain on a tin roof, he'd succumb to the hollow comfort of the stream. Another hour lost to the void, his potential anesthetized by the very digital noise he swore to conquer. And the frightening part was not the habits themselves. It was the biological signature of a neural hijack, a slow-motion liquidation of his executive function. It was the terrifying sensation underneath them, a psychological entropy where the distinction between choice and reflex had completely dissolved. The feeling that his own mind had become an entity stronger than his willpower. He wasn't the pilot anymore. He was just a passenger in a vessel steered by conditioned dopamine loops. One cold Tuesday morning in July, the kind of biting gray winter day that tests the resolve of every commuter in the CBD, changed the entire trajectory of his life. The alarm rang. Cold darkness. A quiet apartment. Rain tapping softly against the glass. A rhythmic seduction back into the comfort of a life half-lived. Under the iron-gray weight of a Sydney July, David's phone cast a bioluminescent snare. His limbic system, that primitive architect of mediocrity, whispered the directive, sleep. This wasn't simple fatigue. It was neurochemical sedation masquerading as comfort. He swiped to turn off with the mechanical precision of a commuter entering the Melbourne CBD. He obeyed with a pre-programmed somatic override. This wasn't a choice. It was a submissive reflex honed by years of micro-surrenders. This is the silent erosion of cognitive sovereignty. He could not resist because his prefrontal cortex had been colonized by the no worries fallacy, a cultural anesthetic that had finally numbed his capacity for internal excellence. But as the screen flickered to black, a metacognitive fracture occurred. In the periphery of his consciousness, he sensed a dual processing dissonance. He wasn't just the sleeper anymore. He was the spectator of his own decay. The watcher, the dormant spark of his absolute authority, bore witness to the failure. David realized he wasn't just tired. He was being audited by his own atrophied potential. The observer was awake, even if the man was not. The watcher observes the synaptic capitulation in high definition. David isn't just failing. He's witnessing the total subversion of his prefrontal cortex by a primitive limbic urge for warmth. The metacognitive split crystallizes. The epiphany strikes harder than a cold Sydney southerly. I am not the architect of my intent. I am merely a passenger in a vessel hijacked by dopamine-seeking circuitry. Rain hammers the tin roof of his suburban cage, a rhythmic reminder of his stagnation. In that void between self-loathing and total burnout, he bypasses the no-worries delusion and downloads the doctrine of the undefeated. Miyamoto Musashi, the strategist who realized that to master the blade, one must first dismantle the ego's internal insurrection. Forget the romanticized, neon-drenched caricatures cluttering your feed. This isn't about the aesthetic of the warrior. It's about the brutal mechanics of cognitive sovereignty. Forget the romanticized myth of the invincible swordsman. Musashi wasn't just a combatant. He was a master of mitigating internal entropy. He understood that the real battlefield isn't the forest of Kyoto, but the synaptic landscape where chaos seeks to overrule your cognitive sovereignty. Walking through the Sydney CBD, you see it everywhere, the "she'll be right" facade masking a total surrender to the default state. Musashi identified a brutal psychological truth most are too soft to face. Your mind is not your ally until it is conquered. It is a biological hijack posing as your own identity. Most Australians are caught in a loop of neurobiological tyranny. They mistake every dopamine-starved craving for a personal command. Because they identify as the mind, they allow every fleeting impulse to dictate their long-term trajectory. That's not living. That's just being a passenger in your own skull. Fear is a signal, not a sentence. Craving is a chemical flicker, not an edict. When you lack the operational discipline to separate yourself from your state, every cheap impulse feels like ultimate truth. You've been socialized to mistake reactivity for personality. Musashi viewed the mind as a wild horse, raw, powerful, yet inherently undisciplined. To achieve true excellence, you must stop being the beast and start being the rider. You don't kill the horse, but you damn well ensure it knows who holds the reins. And let me tell you, modern life weaponizes that internal wildness. It is a targeted strike on your cognitive sovereignty, designed to keep your focus fragmented and your spirit pliable. Every algorithm is a slot machine for your attention. Every notification trains you to escape the mildest discomfort. You are being conditioned like a lab rat in a Sydney high-rise, seeking hits of dopamine to mask the void. You can feel it in your blood, that restless vibration beneath the no-worries exterior. The inability to sit still while the rain hits the tin roof without reaching for a digital hit to numb the silence. Society calls it laziness or a lack of grit. I call it a nervous system that has forgotten how to obey conscious intention. You have lost the executive override to your own biological machinery. Musashi's approach was brutally simple. He didn't wait for motivation to strike during a gray Melbourne commute. He stopped negotiating with his impulses. He began the hard labor of training the beast to sit. We begin with passive neural recalibration. No distractions, no "she'll be right" excuses. David sat for 5 minutes in his flat, the rain drumming on the tin roof. his phone relegated to the other room. A simple protocol: sit still, do nothing, reclaim the throne of your own presence. Immediate synaptic mutiny. The amygdala screams for a dopamine hit, mimicking the frantic pace of a Sydney CBD commute. His mind threw every red alert signal at him. Check the emails, move your leg, escape the silence. This is the algorithmic conditioning fighting for survival. He held the line. Limbic friction peaked, his jaw tightened, but he refused the negotiation. He realized the discomfort wasn't a signal to move. It was the sensation of a broken habit dying. Slowly, the physiological noise subsided into a cold, sharp clarity. The internal storm ran out of energy. Like the harbor water settling after a ferry passes, the turbulence ceased once it realized there was no longer an audience. This is the moment of cognitive sovereignty, when you stop reacting and start commanding. Your brain is a machine of adaptation. If you tolerate mediocrity and broken promises to yourself, you are hardwiring failure into your neural architecture. Every time you break your word, you reinforce a traitorous cognitive loop. Excellence is a non-negotiable standard, not a suburban romanticization. So David closed the gap. The alarm triggers a biometric mandate. Feet hit the floorboards before the limbic system can lobby for another 5 minutes. No emotional consultation. No negotiation with the soft parts of his psyche. Just pure, unadulterated executive function hegemony. He didn't need affirmations. He needed a cognitive hierarchy. Laws etched into his neural architecture, not slogans on a wall. Growth over comfort. Presence over escape. He realized that in the modern Australian sprawl, the no worries mantra is often just a slow-acting poison for potential. 6 months on, the Sydney CBD is a centrifugal force of distraction, yet he moves with absolute stillness. The synaptic mutiny is suppressed. He has rebuilt the foundation of self-trust, bypassing the tall poppy urge to stay small. He is no longer a passenger in his own skull. The modern machine is engineered to profit from your fragmented attention. It wants you sedated, predictable, and burnt out. But a mind that has reclaimed its physiological sovereignty? It is unmarketable. It is impossible to control. It is the ultimate act of rebellion. Tonight, when your mind whispers tomorrow, that is the erosion speaking. Recognize it. That is where you deploy the command. Transformation isn't a roar. It's the cold silence of obedience to one's own will. Stop negotiating. Obey yourself.